Welcome back. Just yesterday, Original Jazz Classics, so the subsidiary of Craft Recordings, announced 4 new and I think really exciting titles for their release calendar for 2024. So I thought I'd make a video, tell you about it, give you some of my thoughts. As always, hit like, consider subscribing to my channel, and if you want practically daily jazz reviews, you can also head over to Instagram and follow me. I'm at what_can_brown. All right, first one up. We're just going to dive right in. This is Red Garland's Groovy. You'll have to forgive mine. It's got some. It's got an old radio station name on the front. Haven't had the heart to try to remove it. This is coming out on April 26th. It was originally put out in 1957, and it features Garland alongside Paul Chambers as well as Art Taylor. So this was originally recorded by Rudy Van Gelder for the Prestige Records label, and this reissue is going to use the original analog masters, and it's cut by Matthew Luthens at Coherent Audio, which is Kevin Gray's company. So Coherent is Kevin Gray's company. He's not doing it. It's Matthew Luthens. It's going to be pressed on 180 gram vinyl, presented in a tip-on jacket, and the retail price for this, as well as all of them, is $39. So the last LP release of Groovy was in 2011, and it was also by Original Jazz Classics. Otherwise, you'd have to go back to the double LP 45 RPM release by Analog Productions, which was in 2006, if you wanted an audiophile copy. As far as the music goes on this record, so there's 5 standards and there's 1 original tune. I think the highlight for me, and what I'd suggest you preview, is probably the opener, C Jam Blues, which is a Duke Ellington tune. Will You Still Be Mine is another to preview with a pretty fun, I think, like fast shuffle going on with Art Taylor on brushes. I think where these tunes stand out, and really where the album stands out, is in how well Red Garland's piano was recorded. There's like a brightness and a warmth to it. I don't know if he had a lighter touch necessarily than other pianists, but his attacks just sound really good on this album, and it was just really well recorded as well. And maybe a better way to say it is that his playing is crisp and exact, but not in a way that makes it feel, I suppose, like stale or too mechanical. My guess is that where an audiophile pressing of this is going to shine, however, is going to be in how well it captures Red Garland's sound, and then some of the sonic elements, I think, with Chambers' bowed bass. So sometimes he bows his bass on a few tracks, and then Art Taylor's brushwork as well. I personally think this is going to be a great release. It's certainly a highlight of Garland's trio releases for Prestige, and he certainly had a bunch. But again, I think this is at or near the top. All right, so the next one up is Kenny Burrell and John Coltrane's self-titled album, and this was put out on New Jazz, and this is coming out on May 31st. So this album, as pictured here, was originally put out in 1963, but the music was actually recorded in 1958, so it was shelved until well after Coltrane left Prestige and even Atlantic. And so he was already at that point taking music in a completely different direction for Impulse. Joining these two guys in the lineup are Paul Chambers and Jimmy Cobb, as well as Tommy Flanagan. Similar to the last title, this album was originally recorded by Rudy Van Gelder, and the reissue uses the original analog masters cut by Matthew Luthens at Coherent, pressed on 180 gram vinyl, presented in a tip-on jacket. And again, retail price, $39. So before now, you had to either go for like the 2016 OJC reissue or the 2008 Analog Productions double 45 RPM. So I mean, I think it's certainly worthwhile having another reissue and having something that sources the original masters. So definitely excited about that. So the music here is 5 tunes. There's actually 2 by Flanagan, 1 by Burrell, and the other 2 are standards. I really, really like this album. For me, the track I Never Knew is a highlight. It features Kenny Burrell pretty prominently, and the sound of his guitar is just really beautiful. I'll be looking for whether or not the piano is necessarily audible everywhere, because Flanagan's playing is understandably really soft when he's supporting Burrell. Not necessarily when he's supporting Coltrane, but when he's supporting Burrell. But you do really want to hear it. I also find, if I'm going to sort of characterize Coltrane's playing, it is great, but it's a little bit unusual, because I think for a lot of us, we're used to hearing Coltrane's later period, and here he incorporates a lot more space in his playing than he does at other points in his career. He still sounds really, really good, but maybe just not as powerful as he plays on other albums. But let's be real, he's playing with a guitarist, and he needs to let the guitarist be heard as well, and kind of balance it, right? To some degree, I would also say that the recording isn't as broad in terms of dynamics. Now, that's not a critique actually of the recording. It's just, I feel like it's like the track choices, like the number of tracks that they chose for this thing are not as variable, I suppose, in terms of dynamics. And so I would say that there's almost this like medium level of dynamics across these tracks that seem to be pervasive throughout the recording. But there's still a lot of beauty in the playing that you can appreciate, and there's also a ballad on here that Coltrane is featured on. So it isn't just like, I don't want to suggest that this is like a one-note recording. It's really, really good. There's just not a whole lot of variation from track to track in terms of energy, in terms of volume. Another great track that I would say, though, if we're gonna suggest what to go preview, I think it's pronounced Liresto or Liresto. That's a really good one where I think Coltrane just sounds especially good. All right, I think all of these are exciting, but this next one may be the most exciting. So this is Southside Soul. It's coming up on June 28th. And yeah, like I said, this is huge. Like, this is just a phenomenal album that a lot of people haven't really been able to own on vinyl. So definitely well worth the inclusion in the OJC series, and I think a great follow-up actually to New Land's excellent treatment of the title Nice and Tasty, which came out like last year, I think. People have been talking about wanting to see this album reissued by Kraft for literally years. So very, very exciting. All right, so this album originally put out in 1960. The pianist John Wright is joined by Wendell Roberts and Walter McCants. This is the first what I would call legitimate release since 1990, and even that 1990 OJC reissue has sold for several $100s. Otherwise, there hasn't been a reissue of this since the 60s, and that was on Status, and it was on I don't know if it was on recycled vinyl, but anyway, it was on the Status label. As with the others, guess what? Similar credentials to the other titles in terms of it being all analog from the original master tapes, pressed on 180 gram with tip-on jacket, but with the exception that Kevin Gray's doing the lacquer cutting himself on this one. If I was a betting man, I'd say it was because he'd never done it before for this title, and so maybe he wanted to do it, or as maybe the others he has before. Just a guess. I'm not entirely sure. All right, so the music on this is blues heavy pieces, and that's not a critique, that's just a fact, and it sounds fantastic. There's something about this particular recording because it sounds better than you'd expect, is what I would say. Like, something about it, even just putting this on relative to other Prestige releases, it feels like there's something else going on. Maybe it's just the energy in the room, I don't really know. The tracks are a bunch of originals, but oddly just 2 by John Wright, then 2 by Wendell Roberts, 1 by Esmond Edwards, who I believe is probably the producer for this, and then 2 by a guy named Armand Jackson, who I believe was a Chicago area sort of band leader. All the pieces on this album are named after places, like street names or intersections and such in Chicago. Roberts and McCants, I think, do a great job with these sort of like relaxed blues progressions that John Wright solos over, and John Wright does play with a lot of dynamics. Sometimes like punches the keys and sometimes barely touches them. He sounds like he plays like he's an emotional player. Like there's a lot of personality, I think, in these tunes, and it's really exciting to hear what he does with them. So I think that is what sort of shines with this album. I think the title track is probably a highlight on this album, and then 35th Street Blues is another that's just like really laid back and cool. So I'd encourage you to check those out. All right, and the last one, and another really exciting one, this is coming on July 26th, and the title is, well, it's Miles Davis's self-titled, or simply Miles, release. So, this album was released originally in 1956 and is the debut album by the Miles Davis Quintet. You may recognize this album as having potentially a blue cover. That was done, I would say, relatively quickly as a reissue by Prestige, but the original, and what they're mimicking for original jazz classics, is the green, and it is the original font choice for Prestige, which is featured here. So there were other releases on Prestige by Miles that were from earlier recordings and kind of around the same time, but those were effectively compilations of older content. This, I believe, is his first sort of album of new content for Prestige in 12-inch format, and it's his first recording with his new quintet. So that quintet includes John Coltrane, Red Garland, Paul Chambers, and Philly Joe Jones. This is an album, I would say, that has traditionally been a little bit more available than some of the other ones, at least than those three others that we're highlighting. So there's a repressing of the OJC, which was from a George Horn remastering, and it was pressed at RTI sometime in probably 2011, 2012, something like that. There was also a, an Analog Productions release. There was an early 80s OJC release, which is probably the first time that George Horn remastering was done. Anyway, this latest edition, as with all of these, 180 gram vinyl, pressed at RTI from the original master tapes. This one, lacquer's cut by Kevin Gray, and presented in a tip-on jacket. So Matthew Luthens is doing 2 of them, and Kevin Gray is doing the other 2. All right, so in terms of the music on this album, there's just one original, and the others are basically standards. Miles plays with his Harmon mute, fairly often in this. I'm trying to think now if he does take it out, but there's a very intimate feel across this album as a result. For me, the track "Just Squeeze Me" is one of the best here. And I would say also the more upbeat one, which is "How Am I to Know?" So that one's kind of fun and features Miles soloing against almost like just bass and drums with this very sparse piano. And it's and I think it's nice because of how much, I guess, air is sort of around his horn. It's sort of the opposite of some of, I don't know, of just what like a dense solo would sound like when you have a full rhythm section in support. I would say Coltrane, so I mentioned Coltrane was a little bit more relaxed or a little bit more restrained on that Kenny Burrell title, even more so here. And remember that this is also 1950, what did I say, 6? So Coltrane sounds fairly tentative here, and it's clear it's early Train for sure when you're listening. Obviously, he had a lot of experience with Miles, and this is on the earlier side of that, and you know that he learned a lot from Miles, so you kind of get to hear him play perhaps before he found his entire voice, is what I would say. But despite that this is earlier stuff, he sounds really nice. This album does not sound like a 10-inch era recording. Well, because it's not. I mean, it's a later recording. But what I'm getting at is I think it sounds even a little bit more modern than even perhaps what 1956 would suggest. All right, so in conclusion, because I just kind of wanted to share this announcement, I guess the question is, what am I going to pick up? So despite the fact each of these are originals, so I have original copies and mine are in great shape. So this is something I picked up from the Sound Gallery in Austin, probably back in 2016. I don't know if Sound Gallery is still open. They may not be, but it's in just really, really nice shape. And guess what? It's a little bit of a bragging thing here. Southside Soul and the Kenny Burrell and John Coltrane title are preview copies. And I already mentioned that that Groovy was the radio station one, and that also has a not for sale stamp on it, which makes it a preview copy as well. So what I'm getting at is that I have really nice copies of each of these, and yet this is just like an extremely strong little sort of collection for their lineup coming up. That I may get them each, even just for the sake of being able to, I don't know, being able to hear what Coherent Audio is doing with these and hear how they compare to the originals, and obviously be able to tell you guys about it, right? So I'll probably end up picking up them and doing a little bit of a shootout, but it's almost like it doesn't even matter whether it's better or whether it's worse. It's more of just what are the differences and what's what are they doing with modern pressings, I suppose, of some of these just extremely classic albums. I mean, each of these 4 are just absolutely beautiful. And I think, at the risk of sounding like a commercial, which this is not, I just think people are going to be excited about picking up each of them. But certainly before you decide to do that, check out some of the tracks that I referenced for you that you should preview, and maybe I'll try to drop a couple of links, just like YouTube links or something, in the description so that you can check out some of these tracks as well. But I think that this is just a phenomenal addition to the OJC lineup, and I'm really excited. So with that, thanks everyone for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.